I now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Spriggs, you had talked in your testimony about a time when economic growth and wages grew in tandem. And based on the economic data, that was a period between 1950 and 1980. We had 97% economic growth during that period, and real wages increased by 95%. That was a period of shared prosperity. Economists would call that a virtuous cycle of growth. So you had high wages, high demand equaled high economic growth. During that period of 30 years, you had annual average growth in the American economy of 4.1%. That wasn't coincidental. That was a period of time where American corporate leaders believed that it was their responsibility to balance the interest of all the stakeholders in the American economy. So it was the shareholders certainly that benefited, but it was also the managers, the workers, and the communities within which these large corporations operated. And if you look at the testimony of the CEO of GM, of DuPont, of General Electric, of Standard Oil, of Coca-Cola, their themes were all consistent. They thought it was their responsibility to help balance the economic interests of all the stakeholders. In 1962, an economist from the University of Chicago by the name of Milton Friedman wrote a book called Capitalism and Freedom, which was taught in a lot of American business schools, Harvard, Stanford, and many others. And he basically argued that forget about all those stakeholders. What you should do as a corporate leader is push all the profits to the shareholders. Forget about the workers, forget about the communities, forget about your responsibility that you yourselves once accepted was yours. What happened during that period, 1980 to 2019? You had economic growth of 94% and real wages increased by 9%. 9%. It was a 39-year period. The average annual growth in the American economy was 2.8% versus 4.1% when wages were higher. In the past 20 years, 84% of the growth in the American economy went to the top 1%. That means, unless anybody on this panel is part of the top 1%, 16% of the growth in that 20-year period went to the rest of us, 99%. We just gave away a massive tax cut to American corporations. We were told by the White House Council of Economic Advisors that each household would receive $4,000 to $9,000 annually as a result of that tax cut. That didn't happen. It's not going to happen, and it never was going to happen. In fact, we have a president that is in a trade war who has imposed a tariff tax that, according to a conservative economist, Mark Zandi, from Moody's Analytics, will cost each American household $1,000. $1,000. The Trump administration and the corporate tax cut has added $3 trillion to the national debt. We will have this year, next year, the year after, a budget deficit of more than $1 trillion. So we'll be $1 trillion short for every budget year. It seems to me that the way to deal with income inequality is through tax policy. Mark Zandi, also, again, a conservative, he said for every dollar that you give away in the corporate tax cut, you can expect to recapture 32 cents. The loss in investment from the corporate tax cut is 68%. 68%. So those who argue here on the margins that middle-class taxpayers have benefited from this, you have to do that within the context of the history. And clearly, the current policies are detrimental to the nation's economic growth and to the American middle class that depends greatly and have contributed historically to economic growth. With that, I'll yield back the balance of my time. Sorry I went over.